Hey guys, so we're going to create this little design that I made here, this little guy here. Let me see if I can pull this up. Essentially what this is a series of circles that are just moving in straight lines and different angles, and at some point or another, they begin to look as if they are rotating around each other. This is all down to just a Gestalt principle of grouping, where we sort of recognize patterns that aren't necessarily, this circle is not actually moving around. It's not like I'm sort of, but it is essentially, right? You know, they're all moving on a single axis, and then you put them all together, it looks as if it's forming some sort of elliptical sort of rotation, revolution kind of a deal. So we've got a couple things that we want to do here. We want to create this series of circles, which in this case is really only one circle that we're going to repeat and layer on top of one another. We want to make sure there's a background color or gradient if we want to work with within Illustrator. We want to make sure that the colors change and the colors change at the same time. So there's a couple things we have to figure out. We have to figure out the timing of the circles. We have to figure out how we're going to apply the various color changes, and at the same time how we're going to maintain a background without the color changes affecting those. And I'll explain why that has to be established. Let's go ahead and make a new composition here. I'm making mine 1080 by 1080. You can make it whatever you want. I'm making mine a minute long. You can make it at least 30 seconds, at the very smallest 30 seconds, but you can make it up to a minute. So let's keep it between 30 and 60 there. And I just keep my background color gray. Recall that this gray here is nothing. It's totally clear. It's just there for a workspace. If you want to have anything in the background, you want to make sure that you have it add a new solid, but we're not going to do that for this point. All we're going to do is create a circle and smack it into the center here. Just hold down the shift button, make a little circle there. And before you do anything else, let's grab our little anchor point tool here. That's a Y on the keyboard. You know, just click on here and just grab our little anchor point and just drag it to the center here as close as you can without it being, I think it's okay if it's going to be off a little bit there. Anyways, you want to as close to the center as you can. Anyways, with that done, let's click on this. Let's go to our position here. Let's click on P for position, and we'll make sure it's in 540 to begin with. It's the very center. It's our X file. And now notice if I press 1080, the anchor point's at the very center. I want to just subtract 100 from that, make it 980, and this will be our first keyframe. And then we'll just drag this over here about 1 second, and I'm actually going to add 1 second and 10 frames to it. I found this to be a little easier to sort of coordinate if I made it just a little bit more than 1 second. Let me just go one a little bit further here. 1 and 10, and then I'll make it a keyframe, and I'll just put it up to 100. So that's 100 from the top, right? So 0 there, and then here's 100. So we've got 100 from the bottom, 100 from the top. And let's make sure we have our keyframes there. And I'll just go forward another second, plus 10 frames. So that's like 2 and 20 frames. And then we'll just make it back down to 980. And so this goes right here, this goes up, and then it goes down. Very simple. Nah, I'm going to make this a bit smaller here. I'm just going to make sure this is just a little bit smaller, just to make everything a little more easier to see. Okay, so let's make sure we can loop this. So hold down the Alt button, hit the little guy there, and remember we have several different ways we could do this. We could do time, we could do this. I'm just going to choose loop out, just so it just loops the same keyframes here, and I don't have to worry about the timing, altering any sort of like timing to it. I'll just go to property, click on loop out type, and then it's just going to repeat once you click off of that. It's going to repeat going up, going down, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Okay, last thing we'll do here is I'm just going to select all these keyframes and then just right click on them and keyframe assistant, easy ease. And that way it's going to give us a little like slowing down back and forth and stuff. It's going to give us, because we're going to repeat this, it's not going to make a difference as far as the delay. It's not going to affect anything. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll just make a new composition, just Control N on the keyboard, make a new composition, make it 1080 by 1080, keep it the background the same if you want, that's fine. Make sure it's the same size, same length of time. Press OK, and then we'll just drag in comp 1. So I'm going to drag in comp 1, and recall that this is all, you know, well, this is still nothing in the background. We'll add a background later here, and let's see. Okay, so first off, let's go ahead and duplicate this a couple times. Control C, Control V. Make sure there's 8 of them. And if we were to say, for instance, grab our rotation here and just rotate each one like 45 degrees from the next one, I'll keep this one 0. I'll turn this one 45 degrees. 45. Nope, not 345. 45. And I'll turn this one 45 degrees as well. But rather 90 degrees. 135. 180. 225, 270, and then this last one here, I'll put 360, but at that point it's sort of, oh wait, no, not 315 rather, not 0, and I'll put 315. Right, there we go. Now we got 8 in a circle. So we've got 8 in a circle here, and we've got 8 in a circle here. But what happens when we play this? Well, that's not the same effect at all, is it? The thing is, what we really want to do is we really want to adjust this to be, like, say, half as big. And so if we're going to make it half as big, then we just need to make the angles apart from each other half as big. So I'm just going to divide these each by 22.5 instead of 45. 45 divided by 2 is 22.5. And then I'll just put 45 here. And then I'll put 67.5. Just adding 22.5 in my head here. And then this will be 90. And this will be 112.5, and this will be 135, and this will be 157.5. Okay, so now notice that this is sort of bouncing back and forth between little hemispheres here. Now, here is the first riddle. The first riddle is, how are we going to make these things create this little effect? And the way we do this is by timing them. We're going to separate them. We're going to have them start at different times. So I'm going to zoom in really close here. And I'm just going to make it to where I can see each little frame. So each little frame is visible here. And I'm going to select them all. I'm actually going to just press U on the keyboard just to get all this stuff out of the way. And I'm just going to select them all over here. Make sure they're all selected. Except for the bottom one being, or rather the top one rather. So I think the top one is the one on the bottom there. Okay, I'll keep that one there. And I'm just going to select all the ones from the bottom here. And I'm just going to move them over one keyframe. And then I'm going to hold down Control and click the top one. And then move the rest over another keyframe. And hold down Control. One more keyframe. And I'll just keep doing this until they're all staggered along this composition here. So we've got 8 total keyframes sort of staggering. And look what happens when we do that. Look what happens to the design. So if I were just sort of undo, Control Z, Control Z, Control Z, just sort of like, look at that, and then Control Shift Z. All right, and look at this. So notice that not only is the timing different, if I were to sort of move this around, right? It forms this little spiral pattern that the circle itself has gotten a little bit tighter. So I'm going to move it forward just maybe one more, just to sort of show you what's kind of going on here, and then I'll sort of pose the first riddle. I'm just going to move it over one, and then I'll Control click, move this over one, Control click. And this is sort of the method that you're going to be using when you do your sort of, shall we say, trial and error, as it were. Control click. Move it over, Control click, move it over. And one more. Okay, so now we'll just watch this. All right, so we can kind of see this is sort of, it's sort of moving away from crossing each other in the center and moving more towards rotating around each other. It's a bit off. So I'm going to leave that there. And here's the first riddle. The first riddle is, how do we get these things to change color? Or not change color. How do we get these things to rotate around each other in this manner? We have to space them out. There's a magic number somewhere, and you can if you are smarter at math than I am, then you might be able to sort of like do a little division in your head or some sort of ratio. I don't know. Maybe you guys do calculus. Who knows? But you might be able. But the other way of doing it is just sort of trial and error to see, like, is it going to be 3 frames apart? Is it going to be 10 frames apart? Is it going to be 11 frames apart? Who knows? It's hard to tell. But the point being is that you've got a couple different things to think about. You've got the timing of how fast these things go up and down, and how fast these things go side to side and stuff. Just recall, this is all just, they're all moving on separate angles, you know, they're all moving in straight lines, but it seems as if they're all rotating around each other just by virtue of sort of happenstance. And so it's all down, or rather this illusion of timing. Now, I want them to change color. Notice here, we want them to change color. So the easiest way of doing that is just going over to our comp 1 over here and just selecting our fill, rather getting our little fill here under contents and finding our ellipse and finding our fill, and then setting a little keyframe for that. Now watch what happens when you do this. I'm just going to select a keyframe here and a keyframe here. Change that to, like, say, for instance, I don't know, yellow, green, something like that. And a keyframe over here. Make this, like, back to blue, I guess. Whatever. So, yeah. And so then we'll just make sure this loops by just clicking over here and going to loop out once again. Property, loop out. Type right there. And so we can kind of click on that. We can kind of see that this right here, now what this does is it goes back and forth from green to blue, green to blue, green to blue. So this is that. Now, if I go over to comp 2, look at what's happening here. You can see that it's sort of turning green in a sort of almost like a gradient, and sort of like the color change is staggered itself. We don't want that. We want them all to change color at the same time. So we can't do that, what we just did. So to explain that, that's one thing. How do we do that? We can do that by creating an adjustment layer that's going to affect all of these guys on this one. So I'm just going to right click over here, new adjustment layer, and we can go over here to effect and find generate fill, and we have a new fill. And so we can, from here, we can animate the fill, and we can go once again from blue to red, from red to green, from whatever we want to whatever we want in here too. I'm going to go ahead and just zoom out slightly so I can see my 1 second and 10 frames, just so I can put this effect in here. And I'll just go to my fill, and I'll click on this. So here's the next riddle here. I'll just click on one here, and that one right there is sort of, shall we say, solved. But there's one more riddle we got to figure out, and I'm going to leave that here, and this will be the last little thing I'll explain. All right, so and I'll just put my keyframes here. Let's put that to blue, blue, orange. I'll sort of click on this guy, Control C, Control V. So we go blue to orange, and everything changes at the same time. And so we want to make sure we loop that. So go ahead and add the loop to that. The last thing we want to do is we want to add a background. Now, once again, this gray right here is gone. It's nothing. It's absolutely just blank, right? So it's an alpha channel, so we can't just rely on that. If I export this now, we get a black screen. So if we get a black screen, that's going to be points off. We don't want that. We add a background. Now, we can always just right-click here and say new solid, but what happens when we add this new solid? Well, first off, let's put it in the bottom layer here in the background. Well, it turns colors with everything else with the adjustment layer. So how do we put this on? How do we put this onto a new background? That's the question. Okay, the question is this: how do we get these things to rotate in this circle, like so? How do we get them to change color at the same time? We kind of solved that just now. And how do we get them to change color with a background added as well? That's the last question here. So that's your task. I want these things to rotate around each other in a circle. I want them to fade in one at a time, starting with this one right here that goes vertically. And I want them also to be on a background that does not change color. So those are your tasks. Think about it, see if you can't figure this out, and I will see you guys in class.